Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Center for Civil Society's final 2025 Givers, Doers, and Thinkers webinar. It's titled The Beauty and Importance of the Declaration, and it's another of the Center's efforts to focus on America's forthcoming 250th anniversary. And this is a special webinar, very special, because we're fortunate to have with us one of America's premier scholars of the founding, Matthew Spalding, who is the author of the new book published by Encounter, The Making of the American Mind. I bought this book, Matt, so you got it. You have a royalty, at least one royalty. It's the story of our Declaration of Independence. By the way, I'm Jack Fowler. I'm the senior fellow for the Center for Civil Society, but more importantly is Matt. Matt is the Kirby Professor in Constitutional Government at Hillsdale College. He's the Dean of the Van Andel Graduate School of Government at Hillsdale's Washington, D.C. campus, and he is Vice President for Washington Operations, which oversees the famed Kirby Center for Constitutional Studies and Citizenship. The Making of the American Mind is not Matt's first book, second book. It may not even be his seventh book, for all I know. He has several really important scholarly and accessible, I don't want to say scholarly like geeky, really accessible works on our founding. They include The Heritage Guide to the Constitution, We Still Hold These Truths, another book, A Sacred Union of Citizens, Washington's Farewell Address and the American Character, and The Founder's Almanac, a practical guide to the notable events, greatest leaders, and most eloquent words of the American founding. Matt, by the way, this book came out today's December 11th. We're recording this. Thanks, folks, for attending. And a little note, if you want to ask a question sometime during the webinar, please, at the bottom of the Zoom, there's some little question function. Ask it, and I will try to get to it. So I want to congratulate Matt for this important newest book of his, which I hope will make America's semi-quincentennial celebration all the more meaningful. And we're grateful, Matt, for the opportunity of your shared wisdom. So in the time that we have, which is about an hour, folks, I'm going to focus on the main points of interest of the Declaration, which is the purpose of Matt's terrific new book. So I want to say, as I filibuster here, Matt, don't worry, you'll get to talk. There's a, there's a broad
Doing great.
question.
I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, okay, good. Very good. I'm here to entertain you. There's a very broad question here about how this book, how the Declaration came to be. So we have a body that produced it, the Continental Congress. There's a setting and an atmosphere, backdrop of what's going on in the colonies at the time. There are cultural influences. Some are distant, like the Glorious Revolution, the Magna Carta. There are some that are more immediate, such as Thomas Paine's Common Sense. We have the authors of the document, with the principal author being Thomas Jefferson. So there are a lot of components to answering the question, how did this come to be? So let me start off, Matt, by asking you about that instigating force. Tell us just what was this allegedly representative legislative body, this Continental Congress that voted to have the Declaration written?
For first, thanks to all of you and Amphil, but also my good friend Jack Fowler. And I'm happy to be here with all of you and him especially. This has been a book of a great, my own kind of love affair with America. This is something I've been teaching for 20, 30 years. I studied this as a graduate student. I was in the middle school in 1976 for the bicentennial. So this has been a reoccurring theme in my life, this history and these ideas. And at this point, I've decided I wanted to write for our semi-quintennial, I think that's how we say it, a book that I wanted to be different and unique and but also speaks to the moment. And so one of the things I spend time on, and the bulk of the book, which I'm sure Jack will dig into and put me on the spot, is a commentary on the actual text of the document. But I spend a lot of the first part of the book setting up precisely what Jack is asking about, which is something we oftentimes don't know, or we've forgotten, or don't take into long consideration. We know the famous phrases of the Declaration. We know famous things about it, particulars, Thomas Jefferson and all men are created equal. But we sometimes lose the fact of what it actually is. It's a political document, and I don't mean that in the partisan narrow sense. I mean that in the grand sense of a political document. It's a document about it's a regime document, we might call it in a larger sense, and it's produced for a particular reason. It serves a particular function, and it's not just some sort of airy-fairy one-off written by Thomas Jefferson, having come down off of his mountain to write a document. It was actually produced by this thing called the Continental Congress. There's an extensive editing process. They create a committee, which a committee of five, but importantly, it's Jefferson, Adams, John Adams, and Ben Franklin are the key three. Then it goes to Congress, the Second Continental Congress. You might recall they vote for independence on July 2nd, and they approve the Declaration on July 4th, which means they spend the evening of July 2nd, all day on the 3rd, and half the day on the 4th, so essentially 2 days editing the document. So I put a lot of emphasis on the idea that it was created by Congress. This is a legislative document. In that sense, it's a law, and it's a law passed by a legislative assembly. Now, a quick word on the word Congress, because again, one of these things we just kind of rattles off of our tongue. Second Continental Congress. Well, it's the second because there was a first Continental Congress. They're chronological, but the Continental Congress, before that, there was something called the Stamp Act Congress. Then there's a Continental Congress. The Continental Congress becomes the Articles of Confederation Congress, and the Articles of Confederation Congress becomes the United States Congress under the Constitution, which is this is a precursor. This is the first iteration, the first formal iteration of the United States Congress. Before America came around, the word Congress was sometimes used for a diplomatic meeting. So the Congress of Vienna, right? But the notion that a Congress was a legislative gathering of based on some sort of representation to pass laws is a complete American invention. And so they create a Congress, which gives it a certain international tinge to it, but then they turn it into this other thing, and it becomes this extra constitutional body that passes laws. And one of the most important things such a Congress can do, or such a legislative body can do, is pass what is called a declaration, which Parliament does historically on some very important occasions. And that's what the Americans are doing here. And so we have to have a very keen sense of its political context. So all that history, the Lexington Concord, Bunker Hill, which happens right at the right when Washington's going off to war, in the beginning of the Second Continental Congress. All of that shapes the context. This document is written in that very hot context, meaning debate. Dickinson and Adams are hotly debating independence. The problem with foreign countries. What about the French? We're potentially going to war with our own mother country, the strongest country in the world. The Spanish are down in Florida. What are they going to do? What about the Indians? They are a hostile force and they're taking sides. The other piece here that you've alluded to, which I want to mention as an additional piece of context, is opinion outside of the Congress and outside of what we could call the founding fathers, or the main figures of the drama, if you will. And this has to do with this question of opinion. And I would put at least two, if not more, things broadly in that category. One you've already alluded to, which is Thomas Paine and common sense. That is, the American opinion of the day was extremely literate, read a lot, and they read newspapers, and newspapers of the day oftentimes had long essays in them, and they read pamphlets. And one of the most influential was a pamphlet by it was actually published anonymously, not under his name, anonymously, called Common Sense in January of 1776, the first formal call for independence. And it, by any standard, percentage of the population, was a bestseller. Washington talks about its influence, as do all the other founders. But the other thing, and then we can move on. But the other aspect of opinion, which again I don't think we quite realize, the most important pamphlet or the most important series of pamphlets and writings and things that the American public was familiar with were sermons. The pulpit and sermons given from the pulpit were the most important reading material in the American colonial times of the Revolution. And so the theological atmosphere, which was broadly Christian, overwhelmingly Protestant, shaped by sermons, shaped by the Great Awakening, shaped by the history of people coming from Europe to find religious liberty, is another, I think, defining context, kind of the moral horizon, if you will, of the whole thing.
Yeah. Matt, the distinction you make of this new sense of the word Congress, thanks for that. Is there I think maybe the most important word here, well, declaration is pretty darn important word, but independence is an important word. Was there any fuzziness about that word? Was it commonly understood as to what we
The
understand it now? No.
Well, one of the things I point out in the book is we call it the Declaration of Independence, but that title was never used in the founding era. That's a modern addition. It's a declaration by the Continental Congress. The word independence doesn't actually occur in the Declaration. Toward the end it refers to independent states, and yet the concept is throughout. And I think the reason for that is there is this kind of twofold meaning of independence, and it comes out in other language several times over the course of the Declaration. And this is what was commonly understood at the time, which is independence means to separate from England, and they were declaring their independence from England. But at the same time, independence meant and implied that they were separating from England and they were going to create their own nation. And really all the documents you see talk about this twofold meaning. Indeed, the right in the Declaration of to do this, which is the fifth self-evident right, is to alter or abolish their constitutions of government, and create new ones. It was a 1-2 punch. It always was understood as a two-sided equation, and independence always had that natural meaning of both separating and creating simultaneously, which is why we point to the July 4th as America's birthday, right? The Constitution comes along later, the Articles of Confederation comes along later to formalize it and create the framework. But really, the announcement, if you will, the birth announcement made by this American people, that we are separating and creating a nation is the Declaration.
I will have a few more word-related questions throughout our little discussion here, Q&A, but I do want to say one thing about the actual title of the book. The subtitle is The Story of Our Declaration of Independence. One could have said that it's the story of the Declaration of Independence, but I assume that was intentional to use our, was it not?
Of course,
Yes.
all such things are intentional. But part of it is, I mean, twofold, right? One is the Declaration is it's universal in its principles, which I'm sure we'll get to, but it's quintessentially American. The way those universal principles are related to the American particulars in the context, the grievances, the colonies, its relationship with the king, the American people. It really is American. So our reference refers to the Americanism of it. But the other thing our implies is it wasn't theirs, meaning
Mm,
the founders. It's ours.
yeah.
It's
Okay.
still ours, and it's still a live question, and it's still our declaration. And it wasn't merely made in 1776. If it's true, it was true then, and it's true today. It's
Yeah.
a
Okay.
regime statement, which means it's ours.
It's not an artifact. Yeah.
Right.
Um, well, before we get to the actual substance of the Declaration, let's talk about the authors. But Thomas Jefferson is the man who, particularly, as we all know, has crafted the Declaration, although the final work had many fingerprints on it. Tell us about his particular role in its drafting, about his writing style, his thought process, and about how he managed as a man, I mean, I guess I'll use the word spiritually, the many hands editing
Right.
process by the Congress, because I assume he was well, he was eloquent. He probably knew he was eloquent. And who are all these people editing my eloquence? Anyway,
Right,
tell us
right,
about
right.
Jefferson.
But well said, and there was a lot to that. The Jefferson story is actually quite interesting, and I think actually gives us much of the answer we look for. Um, Jefferson is a young man. I think he's 23. Um, he arrives late. He's not initially chosen to go to the Continental Congress. He's an alternate. And he only goes to the Continental Congress, the Second Continental Congress, late. So he shows up in June of 75 when Washington is already leaving to go to war. Jefferson is arriving. Um, he comes to the Continental Congress with a reputation to be a good writer. He's already written a couple of pamphlets. One in particular he wrote for the Virginia legislature, which is published without his permission, and it's called the Summary Review of British America. Um, and he's immediately started. They put him on various committees to help with the writing because there's a lot of writing being done. The Congress actually issues a lot of statements. But also, you already had John Dickinson. John Dickinson is from Pennsylvania, and he has written a series of essays called "The Letters of a Pennsylvania Farmer." And is actually probably he's better known than Jefferson, and is also an extremely good writer, if not eloquent himself. Jefferson, as we know, has a wonderful turn of phrase. Um, they immediately put the two of them together to write various statements, and we learn a lot from their interactions. Dickinson knows how to write for a legislature, which is to say he knows how to write for his audience. Jefferson, it takes two or three times for him to learn that lesson. He doesn't like to work with other people.
Hmm.
But by the time he figures it out pretty quickly, he's also very smart. But there's always this tension in him that on the one hand, I'm the brilliant writer who's very eloquent, and I don't like to be edited. And there's a famous story of him complaining to Ben Franklin during the editing of the Declaration about being edited. He doesn't like it. Um, but on the other hand, there's also extensive evidence in Jefferson's own letters that he understood he was writing for the Continental Congress. That is, he was the draftsman. He never says he wrote the Declaration in the sense we take it to be that he just kind of sat down and wrote it cold.
Right.
He has conversations, especially with Adams and Franklin. They meet to discuss, they outline it. He drafts it. There's all sorts of back and forths and allusions to other back and forths we don't even know about before it gets to the written stage. They do some editing. It goes to the Continental Congress. Continental Congress edits it pretty extensively. They cut it by about a third. They rearrange sentences. They add several references, including some important theological references. And that doesn't, Jefferson kind of doesn't, he's kind of bristles at it being edited. Having said that, there's no record, and we don't have a lot of records of the actual debate when they amended. But having said that, there's nothing in Jefferson's letters or any other letters to point to anything that he fundamentally objected to, which becomes important because they added some theological references. He never objected to those. Indeed, the famous letter he wrote in 1825, when he's asked about this, approaching the 100th anniversary of the Declaration, which is when Jefferson dies, one of his last letters, he writes to Henry Lee, and Henry Lee said, "Well, what's with this Declaration?" And that's where he famously said that I didn't take it from any book or anywhere else, but and we sometimes interpret it mean, well, it kind of just came out of his head.
Yeah.
But that's not what he says. He says it was intended not to invent any new arguments or any new ideas. It was intended to be an expression of the American mind, from which that's where I get my
That's
title
fantastic.
from.
Yeah.
But by his own statement, he understood himself to be expressing what had been going on in all these pamphlets and these debates and to capture it in one document. And then it was edited into a much better document. And I think the Continental Congress's edits actually improved the document quite a bit.
Okay.
So it's an interesting relationship with Jefferson. I think one of the faults we have nowadays, this is true in general, is we tend to overread these things. So if you understand the Declaration, we think we need to understand everything about Thomas Jefferson and all of his political philosophy over his whole life. I'm not sure that's quite right. Jefferson is very important, as Lincoln said, all honor to Jefferson for writing this. But I think we can overread it if we merely see it as a Jeffersonian document.
Right.
That's what I meant going back to my earlier comment about how it's a political document in the regime sense, written by a group of these founders who knew exactly what they were doing. And it takes on a much more important role, I think, if we take it out of the context of merely one person.
Okay. Let's look at the Declaration's structure. It's crafted in I would say, most persuasive way. You have a memorable opening, you have a statement of rights, which are also quite memorable, a long listing of grievances, and a closing that is of stated nationhood and courage. So let's go through these sections one by one along the way. And if you wish to give some special attention to anything, it's Mac, but go ahead, please do. But so let's start at the beginning. How important is the Declaration's actual kickoff phrase when in the course of human events?
Well, the first answer is everything in the Declaration. You're just saying, does our matter? Is every word matters? It's actually a short document, so it's
Yeah.
very tight document. So everything matters. The opening is one sentence, begins when in the course of human events. I think that's actually quite important because it contextualizes it for us, which is to say that it doesn't say when in the course of American events or British events or English events. And it doesn't say in the course of events, it says in the course of human events, which is it tells us something about how they understood history. History is human history. It's a history of human beings, rational actors making decisions. And they're placing themselves in that context. And it's not the context of English history or European history, but world history. The Americans, by their architecture, by their choice of pseudonyms, by their choice of books they read, they're thinking of Greece and Rome and
Mm.
London. They're very broad. So the perspective starts off very broad, and that's also the paragraph in which they announce their standard, which say so. In the course of human events, it becomes this one people is going to declare their independence and take their position as a nation. But then it famously says, according to the laws of nature and of nature's God. So it introduces this kind of twofold standard, if you will, that's a judge for the whole rest of the document. So as an opening, it opens rather slowly, which I think is a rhetorical move by Jefferson, which is really quite nice. But it has a powerful punch in the sense that it's putting this in a huge historical context and also claiming a standard which is this high standard of reason and revelation, this large, very large philosophic, theological ground upon which they're standing.
Well, why is it important, Matt, for Jefferson and the Congress to front load the Declaration with a listing of rights that are unalienable rights? What purpose did that serve? And by the way, about that actual word unalienable, it seems to be so meaningful and powerful. If you have any comment about that, and was the listing of rights itself unique in scholarship or in the limited history of the world's republics up to that point? You know, here we have this list of rights. Like, where'd that come from?
Right, right.
So,
No, no, that's actually extremely important. Of course, we know it's important because this is where they famously say that all men are created equal, and it gives America this creedal meaning. But it's an interesting move if you put it in historical terms. I mean, there have been some declaration of rights in the past. There's an English Declaration of Rights after the Glorious Revolution. So it's this kind of concept that's coming into being. But the problem, the challenge here is if you have rejected that we are British, we are declaring our independence, we are our own people, which is what they say. We're no longer English. We're going to start anew. And we've got a standard here, the laws of nature and of nature's God. How do we proceed? Well, we can't proceed based on some sense of a monarchical inheritance or an aristocracy. There's no landed, ownership here. There's no ethnic tribalism. There's no dominant religious rule. This is not the ancient biblical world. So we have to be with something we all have in common. And drawing on that natural law tradition, going back to the Greeks and Romans, but especially through the Christian tradition and British constitutionalism, they start with this argument about rights. But interestingly enough, the way they started, which is a nice rhetorical move by Jefferson, when the course of human events, the second paragraph, we hold these truths to be self-evident. It's very staccato-like, very short words, and it introduces a new approach, which is they're going to go toward about rights, but they're going to begin with things that are understood to be self-evident truths,
Yeah.
which is to say, truth. Self-evident truths are merely those truths that are so obvious as if you understand them, they are evident to you, to the mind. Um, and so I read this. It's not. This is the great philosophical traditions of the Western tradition, both classical and ancient and modern as well, but also the Christian tradition. There are certain truths that man can metaphysically understand, and he is metaphysically free to do so. He thinks and can make decisions based on that, and that's how they start. And there are certain of those truths. There are certain ones that are self-evident, and the first and most obvious one is that all men are created equal. And then they are endowed by their creator. So now we have another reference to the deity, by the way, with certain unalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the question is, why those three? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's a nice, beautiful
Yeah.
phrase, which of course now we think of, but why those three? I mean, it doesn't say it's self-evident that we have our religious liberty or our property for that matter. The way I read that is it's understood to be those are the three things that encompass the whole of human life. Life at the beginning, nativa, birth, natural. Liberty, what human beings do as a day-to-day matter. We practice our liberty. We learn how to practice the arts of liberty. What does it mean to be a liberally educated individual? And the pursuit of happiness, which on the one hand, I think has been wrongly interpreted as what makes you feel good, right? Kind of that's the
Yeah.
modern view of the pursuit of happiness.
Mhm.
Um, but I think they meant that in a much more classical sense. And happiness is the end of classical political thought. Happiness. They surely did not miss the fact that that word is the word, the end of man in all classical thought, and through the Christian tradition. So, from a classical point of view, the pursuit of happiness means living a good, fulfilling, full life and doing good and virtuous things. You pursue it. You don't get it. You don't have a right to it. You have a right to pursue it. But that also leaves open the door that you can understand the pursuit of happiness, which I think they also understood as is the pursuit of ultimate happiness, which from a theological point of view is to ultimately have the beatific vision once one dies and goes to heaven. So there's a
Salvation. Yeah.
Christian way of looking at this as well.
Yeah. Well, this is an actual a book, and you've started writing it at some point. And I should have mentioned earlier, Matt, that you were the Jefferson of the 1776 report, the commission that President Trump in his first term created, and you produced a report. I think in the final days of the administration. But you're
Yeah.
essentially the author of that. Would that be fair? I mean, they're co-authors, but you
There are other very important
yeah,
people that are
yeah,
involved.
yeah. I'm not denying that. But was the thought before, and we're going to get to the grievance next section of the declaration or the grievances, and we'll get to that in a second. But I'm curious, was this book already in your mind while you were writing the 1776 report? Did it come after that? Has this been around thinking about this for
Well, it's
decades,
it's it's
really?
been percolating for a long time, but part of that is I wasn't really thinking about reports and books and these things, but look, I think the essential meaning of America is contained in the Declaration. It's still true today. And I we have lost our educational system has not
Yeah.
upheld that, and we've kind of lost touch with that. And so, as an educator, whenever I get the opportunity to reclaim that and restore and revive that understanding, I take it. So, when the Trump administration asked if I would take a leave and come in and do the 1776 report, and design it and drive it in a direction about what I wanted to teach about, which they were in agreement with, but they let me go.
Right.
I took that opportunity in the same way that the 25th anniversary, which would be a natural, unique moment when we look back to these documents,
Right.
the teaching moment. And it's a moment when a lot of people, perhaps for the first time, are going to read these things seriously. And I would like to give them some meat on that, put some meat on that bone, so they realize this is not merely a historical document. This is not merely a historical event we are celebrating, but it really is something that's important in the whole march of Western civilization. It defines America and it has deep, deep roots in the things that transcend our history and our mere lives and our material existence, pointing towards things that are true simply, if not beyond that, to eternal things.
Sure.
So it's just this is
Yeah.
this is what we do.
Right.
When we believe in these ideas, we all want to take the opportunity. We are all teachers.
Yeah. Well, you teach well, my friend. So teach us some more here. So we're keeping up with the structure of the actual declaration. We've gone through the cataloging, if I may use that, of rights. And now next up is the declaration lists 27, I think, I could be wrong, grievances. They're described as facts that be submitted to a candid world. Of the many grievances there, Matt, are there any two or three that you find of a particular interest or relevance today to this teaching moment?
The well, first of all, I'll say that this is the one thing, the largest part of the document are the grievances. It's the biggest section of the whole document, and yet it's the one section of the document we most are least likely to read.
Right.
No one quotes it.
Passover.
Um,
Yeah.
we just kind of skip over it. And
Right.
yet, if you think about this as a legal case, right? You've kind of made your accusation. You've put down your marker. The end of the document comes to a conclusion, and here's your evidence. This is the meat of the bone. Um, so it's actually extremely important. So one of the things I do in the book is try to go through all 27 and try to make sense of them. And it turns out I think there actually is an order. There about a third of them are about the king's abuses, and about which is say abuses of his power.
Right.
And the next section is about his usurpations, which is the king has usurped legislative power, not just from Parliament, but more importantly from American colonial legislatures. He's usurped power. And then the last section is about his essentially going to war with the American people. That is actually making war on his former people and driving them away by doing things such as hiring Hessians to come over and kill them, or capturing them on the high seas and making them essentially slaves in the British Navy. So there's a meaning to it, but they're all over the place in terms of dates and references and this kind of thing. My favorite one rhetorically is, I think it's the 10th one, where he says he has sent hither swarms of his officers to eat out our substance, which is a wonderful, great biblical allusion.
Yeah.
But also that's good rhetoric. I really like that one. But I would probably say probably the crucial ones are there's I think I have my numbers here is 13 and 23 if somebody's taking note of these things. But it accuses him of combining with others to do things, and that's a reference to Parliament. And then later on, it talks about the king has abdicated government here. And the earlier reference is to pretended legislation, and then the second reference is to abdicating government. Now, what the heck does that mean? Well, it's a very important reference that the founders put in there to James II, who is the king that it essentially has through pretended legislation, and then he flees under when in the Glorious Revolution, and the Parliament says he has abdicated government here, which is to say that this is the grounds upon which the English have dethroned kings in the past. and we are we are associating ourselves with doing precisely that, and that's what we're doing. So it's a very thought through document that teaches, and anybody reading at the time, especially the king, they knew exactly what they were talking about.
Matt, one of the pertinent questions of America today is its religiosity or lack of it, and Adam's statement about this republic they were creating is something that would work if there was a moral people. So, religion, God, references to God are strewn through. So the importance of God matters to the Declaration, I would imagine, I would say. And
Yeah.
there's a phrase in your book about the theology of the Declaration. So would you tell us what is the theology of the Declaration?
First of all, I think that's again an extremely important question and a whole kind of line of reasoning, if you will. The Declaration usually is read as it's kind of a sectarian document. There's really nothing there. Partially that's because we associate too much with Jefferson. I'm not sure that's the right read. Jefferson knew his audience, knew who he was writing for. Reverend Witherspoon was the chaplain at the time. John Hancock was a serious Congregationalist. That wasn't going to happen. There is a theology of the Declaration. I guess some of the people say it's kind of an odd phrase, but there is one. I'll explain that. And I think you actually can't read it without that. Um, the first character introduced in the Declaration is God. Indeed, there are only two characters in the whole Declaration, individual characters. One is God, and the other is the King of England. And they're both kings, and one is a tyrant, and one is not. There's very beautiful parallelism to that. And then God appears four times: the laws of nature and of nature's God. He's a creator God that endows man with his rights. He's the supreme judge of the world, which is say that he can look at the rectitude of the intentions. He can look at man's heart and judge his intentions. And at the end of the document, he appears as divine providence. He actually does intervene in human affairs. So there's a theology. There's more to this. Indeed, if you when you follow it, it goes from a largely a God we know through our reason, say through general revelation, right? What we see around us with our own minds, but it kind of builds, and over time that God becomes more intimate. He knows us,
Yeah.
right? And so they're actually you read it that way, and I think you can't not read it that way. Um, God is very important to this document. It's not the Christian God. There's nothing here about particular biblical doctrine. There's nothing sectarian about it. They wanted to avoid that because the English Civil Wars had divided Protestants, Catholics, but perhaps even more importantly, Protestants and other Protestants. They wanted to avoid all that. How do you do it? You base it on the common denominator, which is not to say the kind of the secular rationalism common denominator, but the common denominator of all those religions, which is more like what we might say is the Old Testament God,
Yeah.
the God who's there, who's with us, who knows us, and intervenes sometimes. And I think there was a very profound and strong sense of that God. And if you read the Declaration without that, you really lose its meaning. Where do these rights come from? Who creates us? And then at the end, to appeal to that God. If there's no meaning to it, then if there's no substance to it, then that's of no meaning.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think we too often read it as merely a rhetorical flourish, but the care with which they edited this and wrote it tells me otherwise. Um, that had meaning to it, and our obligation as historians and as students and as citizens is to give them their due and understand it as they understood it. And I think you can't separate from its theology. The question then is, what does that mean for today?
Yes.
um, and that's where this document really points beyond itself, because the implication, which I actually agree with this implication, you can't understand our rights, which they are our rights as Americans, but the rights of man, of this creature, this being, created being called man. You can't understand those rights unless you have some sense of its theological context. It doesn't mean you have to be Christian or anything in particular for that matter, but you, at the very least, you have to understand that you're not God, but you're also not merely a beast. You're something special, and you are a rights-bearing thing. And that comes from somebody else outside of our immediate material and human world. And once you do that, you're on the road to more transcendent and eternal questions, which is clearly where they're coming from, I think. Even Jefferson, for that matter, Jefferson had very odd views. He didn't think Christ was divine and didn't like miracles and these things, but he had a general theological sense about him
Yeah.
that there's something outside of us. So there's more to that theological question, I think, than the modern academy has long thought, growing out of the famous progressive historians who studied the Declaration. But there's something there, which is why, among other things, I begin my prologue with a quote to C.S. Lewis, because you recall he read medieval history, which was a not religious history, medieval history
Right.
about and pagan history. Um, and good history points you towards eternal questions. And that's why the C.S. Lewis makes this point in his great autobiography, Surprised by Joy.
Well, we have two significant sections left of the Declaration, and the penultimate one, believe there's a sense of sadness in there. Like it seems like a profession of hey, we tried, and there's targeted anger at the king, which there was in the grievances. There's a disappointment with expressed to Parliament, but there's also a sense that when the revolutionary dust settles, um, there can be friendship. So that's my view. I could be wrong. I could be missing obvious things, Matt. Would you give us your thoughts on this penultimate section of the Declaration?
Yeah, the it's actually an important it's a self-standing paragraph after the grievances before you come to the conclusion.
Yeah.
And it's not obvious why it's there. But this is one where it makes reference to our British brethren. Now, the Continental Congress on numerous occasions wrote letters to the British people, and they addressed them and they appealed to them, as they'd been appealing to Parliament and the King and all of these things.
Olive
Um,
branch petition, things like that.
yes, and so I was like, okay, maybe it's unfinished business, and they want to appeal to the British people, and um, yes and no. Um, it's clearly a statement we have made our appeals to our British brethren. But I think it tells us a lot, actually, in many ways, more about us than it tells us about them. Because the distinction here is between us and them. And them are our brethren, which is say we're related to them,
Yeah.
literally. They're
Right.
our brethren. They'll still be our brethren. We've appealed to them. They haven't listened. They're deaf to our words. But then there's a lot there about us, which is to say that it talks a lot about us as a people. And here you start seeing it kind of answers this question. So throughout the Declaration, it refers to this one people, and they're the British. Excuse me, they're the Americans, and it alludes to another. It doesn't say another people. It says another,
Yeah.
and that's the British brethren. But the British are subjects. They're subjects to the king. That's why they're deaf to our appeals about rights. We, on the other hand, are a people because we've suffered together, we've fought together, we've bled together, um, but also because we together collectively have an understanding of what it means to be a people in the sense of being a people governing ourselves. And that has to do with the claim of our rights, of our protection of the rights of others, of developing law based on consent, all the things we associate with the American cause, which the British have not done. And they can't because they understand themselves as subjects. So the best they can be, all they can be are friends, but friends and enemies in some cases,
Yeah.
but they're still our brethren. But so that distinction becomes, I think, extremely important because now you had a series of grievances about the problems with the king. The king has abdicated government here, so he essentially has been dethroned. But now you have this other question because by international law, but also just by regime arguments, going back to Aristotle, on what grounds can you claim to be a regime? Well, one ground is you're a people. And the Americans aren't a people because they're British. It's not based on ethnicity. And they're not a people because they're all the same religion, because they're not. They're a people because of their common experiences. So the practical stuff does matter, but also because they have now dedicated themselves, um, as Lincoln would later say, but as the Declaration says, they're declaring these things we hold to be self-evident. These are the principles upon which we are going to define ourselves, and define our regime. So that's why I say it's the Declaration announces formally that we've separated, but actually, no, we're actually a people. And as a people, we are now going to begin a nation. And it's that nation that gives, and that nation then is unique based on universal principles, but it's very particular. It's American, it's these 13 colonies. And now we are going to govern ourselves as by right a nation can do.
And that's as we conclude the declaration prior to this, well, if the signatures are the conclusion, well, the final paragraph is that it's the separation is formally stated, a nation is declared, quite interesting, the signers are pledging their lives, fortune, sacred honor. So, would you address the final section, and then separately, regarding the signers themselves who did risk their fortune and sacred honor? There are a few maybe worthy of your discussion of what some of these guys actually went through because they signed this document. So,
Yeah. The so the last paragraph is kind of begins rather formally, which again reminds us why this is a piece of legislation. We therefore, the representatives of the Continental Congress, representing the American people, therefore do it's very formal. And so it reminds us, no, this actually is a political document. So that's an important aspect of it. But this is the first time that it's revealed who wrote the thing. Up until this point, you can't tell. There's no formal reference. And all of a sudden, it's the representatives of the people on behalf of them. Um, they begin the paragraph making their reference to the rectitude of their rectitude of their intentions of the Supreme Judge. And then they make the formal declaration. These colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent. Uh, that's actually that language is actually Richard Henry Lee's motion of June 7th, which is say that whole document, everything up to this point, is written around
right,
that formal declaration.
formal
That's
motion. Yeah,
the formal motion. It literally is a motion passed by the Continental Congress.
yeah,
It adds there a claim of also having the right to do what any other nation can do, right? Declare war, have relations with other countries, diplomacy, um, and it formally declares independence. But then there's one last sentence, which you've already alluded to, which is we should actually read that so we get the language exactly right. Um, and it comes after the formal declaration has been made. And so the question is, what purpose does it serve?
right,
Um, because technically, it doesn't serve any purpose. The declaration has already been made. They've already made their case. And then it closes, and for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. So it begins by appealing to the rectitude, to the Supreme Judge for the rectitude of their intentions, and it ends with a reference to divine providence. That's the completion of the theology, if you will. but it closes with a technically and legally meaningless sentence. But what is it? It's an oath that they make to each other, pledging their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. And what makes it electric, and this is where Jefferson had this is Jefferson's gift. This is his language. Um, our rights are life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. They pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Clearly, parallelism,
Right.
right? Our lives, our fortunes, our sacred honor. But the words have changed. So lives, yes, our physical lives. Many of them fight in the revolution. Um, Several of them have their sons killed in the revolution. Several of them are imprisoned. Several of them are wounded. They lead they lead military regiments and divisions. Um, but then it's not our liberty, it's our fortune. And fortune here is not merely physical money, right? Your fortune was your how you understood your well-being, everything you have, your family, your estate, your posterity. And many of them gave that up. Um, the uh, they some of them self-financed regiments.
Yeah.
Some of them gave up their property to finance things.
Is there any one in particular that really moves you
Uh,
in what they gave?
well, I mean the you know the some of them gave like some Morris, for instance, was understood to be the financier of the revolution.
Right.
He famously There were famously Morris notes. He was probably the richest man in the colonies. He put lots of money into it, probably the equivalent of 30, 40, 50 million by today's standards. And yet he died a pauper, and he died in debtor's prison because of bad investments.
Oh gosh.
But he gave his fortune.
Yeah. Literally. Yeah.
Um, there are others that I mean, I believe it was Witherspoon's son. I believe was killed by a cannonball.
Yeah.
Um, there's one of the I think Morton, one of the last a later signer, had two sons in the military. Both of whom were captured. One of whom, and he dies before they do. He dies early. He doesn't formally get to sign the Declaration. But one of his sons was captured and died on a British prison ship in New York Harbor,
Yeah. Wow.
which which means they would have dumped him overboard.
Yeah. Was this
So there's a powerful story as to what actually happened to these guys. But I will note that our lives, our fortunes, they gave those things up.
yeah.
But none of them gave up their sacred honor. None of them recanted the Declaration.
Right.
But in some cases, they punished their children to try to force them to recant, and they refused.
Matt, I'm curious, and I know you touched on it already, but you're 10 years old, Matt Spalding in a little league out in California. Are you, as a young man, intrigued by all this? Or was there some kind of event? Was there a professor in particular that really made you um, go down this path to fall in love with America and with the founding?
Um, well, so part of this goes back to the educational question. I opened the book with some references to Tocqueville, who writes about his visits to America when he's doing his research for democracy in America. But in Democracy in America, he makes a distinction between different types of patriotism, two in particular. There is an instinctive patriotism, which is the patriotism you have based on where you were raised,
Yeah.
your family, your little league team. You're proud to be from California or Wyoming or Massachusetts. But then that instinctive patriotism eventually starts growing into something else. You learn your ancestors fought in World War II, or the guy down the street was in Vietnam. Um, you learn about unknown ancestors from long ago who were involved in things, and then other people that did things that you're very interested in. You get that, especially as a young person, you get that more heroic sense of history, which you start fleshing out when you start reading more.
Yeah.
And you eventually come to what Tocqueville calls reflective patriotism, where you understand that our rights are something to be protected and we are part of a larger inheritance and something to be preserved. Now, when that occurs and how that occurs and at what point, it's always hard to say.
Yeah.
At what point did I come to love my country more and more? I don't know. Um,
But
but
you
I remember,
do. I
I remember the parades in '76
yeah.
and loving all those things. And then was from a reflective point of view, I went to Claremont and studied with Charles Kessler, and he told me to take class from this guy named Harry Jaffa,
Yeah.
and they taught me about what America really meant. And I read lots of things, including a lot of Lincoln, and it just kind of happens. It's hard to pinpoint it, but at some point, you come to love your country again and again and again. And what I'm hoping is a book like this. My intention here, my largest intention here, is that either for the first time or again, you fall in love with your country. Because what's great about America is, yeah, it's a messy history. It made mistakes. We're fallen people, as all individuals are. But it just aspires to these principles. It's the principles. It's the larger meaning, and you don't necessarily see that as the little kid running around in a parade or flying a flag, or you only learn that later as you mature and grow from other people, what sacrifices they made, or when you read about it and come to understand it. And that's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah. Can I get one, as we have 2 or 3 minutes left here, one plug for Hillsdale, and which has, besides being a college, has a K through 12 education program. I would assume the essence of your book, and maybe actually the book itself, is something imbued in that program. Is that correct?
Yeah, generally speaking, right? This is right, kind of representative of how we approach these questions, and this book will be used widely in schools, among other things. I'm hoping as widely as possible.
Yeah.
We do specifically have a K through 12 curriculum, and a lot of that is and we're going to have a lot more K through 12 materials come out for next year. And if you've seen any of our online courses, we have two online courses coming out next year on subjects dealing with the American Revolution, and probably some other things too. So watch out for those.
Oh,
But
always watch.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, the book is, again, The Making of the American Mind, the story of our Declaration of Independence. It is a very readable book. It's a lovely. I was going to ask you a question. Did July 2nd get the short end of history stick? But we'll save that for another day. One of Matt's many books. I do find you to be the scholar of the founding, and it is a real honor to have you here with us at the Center for Civil Society to discuss this important book, Matt. Wish you the best of luck and fortune with it. And I wish you and your family and everyone who's here watching this, we wish you happy Hanukkah, because I think we're in the middle of Hanukkah's just started as we're talking on the 11th, and a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to all. Thanks so much, Matthew. Thanks, folks. And
thank
we'll
you,
be
Joe.
back early next year with some sort of webinars at the Center for Civil Society. Thanks very much.